Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comments or questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Hi, Cam.
How you doing?
How did you recommended approval?
Yeah.
Well, not to
They
put you
all
on the
know
spot,
you.
Cam, but you did.
I've been sitting here watching all you guys up here, looking at the clock, because this one issue has been going on now for what, almost an hour?
How long did
Yeah.
you guys talk?
Well, if you had any idea how many hours and hours and
Yeah.
hours we put in on the planning
Yeah.
commission on this one topic. In fact, we had that December 18th meeting was a special meeting just for this, because it's just huge. But from a layperson's point of view, as my fellow planning commission members, also, some of us have more understanding of this electronics nonsense than others. But the fact of the matter is, what we were given is the Telecommunications Act that says we really can't, as a municipality, we can't stop a company from coming through our city. So that's the main thing we had to work with is, look, we just have to put something together that's going to work in looking at all the aspects of it. If you look at the draft ordinance as it's written out, it's, in my opinion, it's pretty good. And there's a lot of research and there's a lot of hard work from staff and the planning commission that went into this. The difference in the height, the request for a difference in the height requirements or restrictions kind of came in a little bit later, at least as far as the commission went, because we had a lot of good input for weeks and weeks and weeks and months on this when we were putting this all together, and this request for a change in height requirement just came in very late. And from my position on the planning commission, based on all the information that we had months prior to that, I'm not sure that it needs to be changed as written. But as a layperson, to probably you people as laypersons with regards to electronic communications, Roger probably has a little better understanding. There's a lot of work in this, and there's a couple of things maybe we can tweak out of it, tweak it up a little bit. If you want to see a monopole, which a lot of us went to look at, right behind Northtown Mall, between Northtown Mall and that Michael's Office Supply and Sport Mart. In fact, right behind the Sport Mart there, that's a monopole for telecommunications, and that's what they look like.
Well, what do you think?
Mentioned from if they're 100, 120 feet high, if you got a 6-foot panel, when they're that high and that remote from wherever you are, unless you're right under it, the difference, the size of the panel doesn't really matter. It really doesn't. From your sight lines, wherever you're looking at this, they're not attractive. No matter what you do, they're not attractive. I think we worded in the monopoles because the monopoles are a little less obtrusive in our scenery and our environment than, say, a lattice tower type. But suffice it to say, there's a lot of work that's gone into this, and so as you're looking at the draft ordinance, that's a very good guide to go by when you're discussing this and thinking your vote. Anyway,
Thank you, Kay.
thanks.
Thank you. Gary?
Mr. Long, do you have any words of wisdom for us tonight?
Well, Mayor, members of the council, I think you did hear from.
Well, let me get to the public hearing. Can I close that first? Is
I
that
would like it in the next one.
okay? Fine. Sure.
Mayor, Councilor
I
Quick.
thought you were bringing this forward.
No, I was just going to say that I think there are obviously some issues here. I think you've heard at least a couple of, I think, probably some very easy to incorporate suggestions on the proof of insurance. For instance, I think there's some clarification. The height issue, I think, to be candid, you've got several industry representatives in the audience, only one of which is raising, at least initially, a concern about the 120-foot. There may be other companies out there that we haven't even heard of yet that think it should be higher than even 165. So I think it's a little difficult to pin down a number, to be candid. I mean, I know from the ordinances, and our firm has been involved with drafting for other cities, that they have been in range between 120, 150, 160 feet. Crystal's 130 feet, for instance. I could recite for you the numbers, but they're all within that range. I think what the council can do is act with their discretion to look at that balancing between what's a reasonable height restriction that would, but also accommodate the industry to proceed. And 165 feet, of course, doesn't preclude APT from coming into Mounds View. They're already, in fact, they've already got a lease for the city of Mounds View to go on your water tower. That's already been approved by the city council. So they're already in Mounds View. So the whole concern, it may be a new issue, but APT is already in Mounds View. At least they're going to be if they build on the water tower. I shouldn't say they're operating yet. So I don't think I can give you a specific number, but I do think it's the framework we're dealing with in here is the Federal Telecommunications Act, which does say you cannot place unreasonable restrictions, you can regulate, you can have zoning ordinances in place that do regulate the height and the setback. And I guess I differ a little bit with Mr. Coyle. You're not obligated to grant a CUP to everybody that comes in front of you. If they meet your requirements, and you have no reason, you cannot discriminate. But if for some reason you do decide that 140 feet or 130 feet or 120 feet is your number, and you have good basis for that, and somebody can't stay within that, you can consider a variance. You're not going to be obligated to grant that. But ultimately, I think it's something that we should spend a little time with between now and the next reading, because what I'd like to do is to get a little bit of sample from some of the other ordinances that have been prepared, and if there does seem to be a number that is slightly higher than that seems to be the range, that would be something I think at least I'd be better prepared to recommend to you at the next meeting.
Wouldn't it be to our advantage? I'm uncomfortable with variance. I just like the word. It has a connotation that leads in all sorts of directions. Wouldn't it be to our advantage to have some professional design criteria of some sort to set this height limitation on? Unreasonable is rather, it's pretty broad. Totally subjective, if the truth were to be known. What I'm saying is, if we're going to set a height, do we have some professional design criteria, some engineering stats or whatever, to set that height limitation upon?
I think what you're going to run into, and perhaps maybe the industry people can comment on this to see if I'm on the right track here. I think what you're going to run into is that for any given site, the height might vary. I don't think you can say ahead of time, this number will always work, or this number will always work because this is how the technology works. Because part of what determines the height is the area that they're trying to serve and the terrain that is within that cell. And so maybe what we do is at the time of application, we say we need a study that shows us this is the minimum height you need for these set of circumstances that are particular to this cell. And so we'd get that study, but we'd get it at the time that we know where the tower is going to go. Because I don't think ahead of time, just for Mounds View as a whole,
correct.
we can say every tower is going to have to be at no higher than this to serve. Is that a fair statement? Okay.
Is there any further comment or question from the public? This is a public hearing.
I just want to speak to Michelle.
That's fine, please.
That certainly is written into, as I understood it, would be part of the design criteria in the ordinance as it is now. We certainly don't build a pole any taller than it absolutely has to be. In fact, what we do is when we're going to install an antenna, you add another foot on the pole, it costs more money to build the pole. So we don't build them any taller than we have to be. And supplying the city with that study data, certainly it's not proprietary. By the time we pick the location, all we do is we take a boom truck and park it out and test, actually hang an antenna up there with the landowner's permission and conduct drive tests of all the roads to see where the handoff would be if we go at different heights and how the coverage quality would be at the different heights, and we go with the shortest height that will work. So certainly providing that information would be no burden on my client whatsoever.
Okay, very good. Is there any comments or questions from public? Okay, at this time, I'm going to close the public hearing. It's my recommendation to the council. Now, we can do this one of two ways. We can go ahead and approve the first reading, as this has been stated, and then come back at the second reading and make the appropriate changes, if any. I don't know if that will work. We'll probably be here until midnight if we try to have a first reading with caveats. Jim, are you comfortable that, have you identified some of the things, the weaknesses that we need to shore up?
Yes.
Can you bring it back to us? Why don't we do that, council? That's my recommendation. Remand it back to staff, not have the first reading, get it polished some more, and then perhaps at the next reading, or the first reading, we'll have it in better shape. If we start identifying the shortfalls here for the purposes of the first reading, we might get home by tomorrow morning sometime.
I just wonder if there's a problem because we had a moratorium and I don't know when that expires.
March. My
Okay,
assumption,
we're
though,
okay.
and the,
Okay.
well, with the effective date and all, we're pushing up against that.
The issue.
But my read on this, and Bob may want to comment, is even if the moratorium lapses, we don't have this type of use specifically noted in our ordinance, so that it's not permitted at this time. And that's why we're putting this in place. So I don't know that we have to be too worried about it lapsing. Because right now, you can't build these kinds of towers, they're not listed.
Chair would entertain a motion to postpone.
Second. I thought
Okay.
you were making.
Motion by Stigney, second. Okay, second by Koopmeiners. Further discussion? All those in favor of postponement until an unspecified date signify so by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Jim, everything you have in hand what we need now to go forward? Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Very informative, very helpful. And I trust you will be available for assistance as needed in the future. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. This time I'll open the public hearing, the 7:10 public hearing for ordinance number 593, an ordinance to set the water rates and surcharges. What was the regular meeting and open the public hearing on water rates? Is there a staff report on this? A brief staff report on this?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you have before you ordinance 593, which increases the water rates 5 cents, effective with the January 1997 billings. The city charter requires that all utility rates be established by ordinance. The utility rate study was completed in early 1996 that recommended an increase in the water rates of 5 cents in 1996 through the year 2000. The staff is looking at that to see if there's other ways things that we can do to alleviate some of those increases. One of the issues, the telecommunications ordinance, that may generate some additional fees for the city and the water department that could offset some of those rate increases. We're also looking at some of the transfers that the water department makes to some other funds for some services to see if we should reallocate some of those. We're looking at the operating expenses to see if there's things that can be done there, but at this point, we think the 5 cents should be enacted. The 1997 budget was prepared with that increase in there. The first reading of the ordinance was conducted on December 15th, with the second reading and the public hearing scheduled for tonight. If there's any other additional information that we could provide, I'd be willing to attempt to do that at this point.
Okay. Thank you. With that at hand, this is a public hearing. This is the portion that the citizens have the opportunity to make comments or ask questions.
Yes. David Janke, 8428 Eastwood Road. This brings up the old question of the new meters. I thought the new meters were going to save us money and we were going to probably go down in rates. Well, and then I see it's going the opposite. After we spent, I don't know, probably close to $1 million, we're going to raise our water rates now.
I guess
What happened to this talk when we were all down here against putting those new water meters in?
My understanding of looking at past reports was that the increased accuracy in the new meters, along with the surcharge, would pay for the meter conversion, and I believe that was the surcharges would be in effect for approximately 5 or 6 years. After that point, there should be additional revenues coming in because of the accuracy of the meters. The study that I'm referring to was done in February of 1996. Like I said, that indicated a 6% rate increase in 1996 through the year 2000. There had been some fairly large increases in prior years, and from my standpoint, I want to see if we can do anything to minimize those increases. I think that when the rate of inflation is 3%, to continue to have 6% rate increases is not realistic, and we have to look at how we're operating to see if we can minimize those. I can't address specifically what was said prior to my coming here, but like I said.
So you're telling me in 5 or 6 years before our rates go down because we got these new water meters now? Is that what you're saying? Because of the changeover, just the cost of changing them over?
That was a fairly large cost, and there's a surcharge that's added onto your water bill to cover a portion of that. Just for your information, the facilities, the antennas that are going on the water tower are estimated to bring in somewhere in the range of $10,000 to $15,000 per antenna, and that should offset the need for some of the future rate increases. So if there's 3 or 4 antennas on there, that could be somewhere in the range of $50,000 additional revenue that it should bring in.
Okay, and that's fine, you know, but what scares me is every time that we got some extra money in our budget, it was spent for something else. It was spent on something else. It wasn't spent to reduce cost. It was spent on putting new water meters in, going to the ordinance of having cement curbs and costing the taxpayers more, buying the Bellray Ballroom, putting the bridge up. It's nothing to reduce costs, and this is what I'm scared of. Now you're telling me that the antennas are going to bring us in some more money, but I just think it's going to happen the same thing. Is that $50,000 or something? Why, we got it up here, let's buy something else. So you're not assuring me of, you know, and I'm not going to make no more issue of it, but those are the things that scare me. The spending of this city council. In the past 8 years, they've just went spending, you know, there's no, and now we add, and I hope this new council takes a good look at some of this stuff. Every time we get a fund to get in there, we buy something else.
Dave, I assure you we will be. I think that's a given, that this council will be taking some very conservative approaches in the future. But I think what the Director of Finance, if I heard him correctly, what he's trying to convey is, and I'll take a shot at it here in perhaps a different way, the automatic phone meter reading system that brought in an additional $31,500 per the consultant's study, and I make no judgments there, and the quarterly meter charge that brought in $35,280 from additional revenues, plus the quarter, well, it's a little more than that. There was a quarterly meter charge of an additional approximately $3,600 coming from the commercial base. All of that, all of those givens were mainly directed toward meeting the debt obligations of the new system. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
The 5 cents increase that you see before the council this evening is geared toward maintaining a viable operation in the water department aside from those improvements, those public improvements, that being the new meters and so forth. All of those things that were promised to you by the previous council were promised on the basis that they would help defray the costs of the new system, those gains in efficiency. The 5 cents before us this evening is to ensure that our ongoing operations, that is, i.e. providing the service, will remain in the black and not bring a deficit next year. That's my understanding of it. Is that a correct assessment?
That's correct.
Okay. So I mean, you need to keep the separation there. Now, what happens at the end of the time frame, the 6 years out, when the system presumably is paid for, the debt has been retired, and then we need to make another decision at that time, whether or not it will be continued and used as an ongoing revenue source, or whether it will take some other form, or whether there will be a reduction in operations that will mitigate it and offset it. All of those things are about 6 or 7 years away.
Okay, and I understand that, and I can see the point. And I guess that what I'm doing is making a statement. If we wouldn't have spent the money that much money on those water meters, I don't think we'd be looking at a nickel rate. Is that right? I mean, I'm just making a statement.
As the mayor indicated, there's two issues from the operating
Okay, right,
standpoint.
and
think
okay,
we
and
would
I
be-
won't argue them, but you get my point, I
Yes.
hope.
I understand very clearly.
I'd just like to comment, as you know, I voted against those water meters, but yet this rate increase is a separate issue, as has been explained. And we had a report done by our financial consultants last year to evaluate whether we were recovering the cost for operating the water system. And one of the problems was that the reworking of a lot of the system, which is very old, the new tower, and then we had every water filtration plant has been renovated in the last couple of years, and there were bonds issued a number of years ago. We weren't getting enough money in to pay off the bonds, so we were actually depleting the water account. And there's a sizable reserve in there to prepare for any emergency event that we couldn't foresee, but those things happen. And so the auditors told us to operate the city in a conservative fashion. We had to offer increases, or we had to adopt increases, or we would continue to eat into the reserves on an annual basis and not have anything left to keep the system going, which is about 30 years old, I understand, throughout the city. And that audited report, I'm sure it's available for anyone who would want to look at it at City Hall. And that goes into the costs of what it costs to get water to our houses. And the water meter was a separate issue.
If I could maybe make two additional comments also. As Julia alluded to, there were some bonds issued in 1991, and one of the bond covenants or requirements of those bonds is that the city maintain a viable water fund. Even with the budget as it's prepared, we're estimating that over the next several years, our cash balances are going to be coming down slightly, so we're not building up cash reserves. We're still eating into those cash reserves, but we think we can maintain them at an adequate level. But the bond covenant does require us to basically operate on a break-even point.
Again, I clearly understand that. It is two different issues, but I hope you get the point I was making.
No, I think it's a good time to say maybe we should get a report from staff at a future meeting on how that water system's turning out.
Because we still
That's another
spent
issue.
close to $1 million that could have been used.
Well, the homeowners are paying an additional charge every month for that meter,
Right.
in addition to their water charges. That's right.
Councilmember Quick and then Councilmember Koopminer.
Bruce, can we use water account money for anything else other than the water system?
The council has some prerogative, but at this point, no, you cannot.
You can borrow from it, though,